Thank you for choosing In My Shoes. I'm Hilda Kathy Broady, your host. I'll be joined shortly by my co-host, Joe Smith, aka Bones X. We're gonna do our special In My Shoes 2 segment. So I'm not alone today. I'm with my co-host, Joe Smith, aka Bones X. And we're gonna do something totally different. Now we're gonna do some educating of our audience. We've been having discussions about states not complying with the federal government's dictates, and we never really address, well, what are the laws and what are the rules, and maybe we need to add that part of the subject matter because it can't all be wrong all the time. Yes? No? Am I? Well, it appears that it's wrong all the time, but it better not be wrong all the time. Otherwise, why are we doing this? Can I say that?
I think you can.
I can say
I
that.
think you just did.
Okay. Today we have a very special guest. It's Weldon McWilliams the fourth. You're a reverend,
Yes, I am a reverend and also an assistant professor of history at Dutchess Community College.
and you're going to help us to educate our audience, fill in the gaps that we've omitted.
As best I can. I hope I can.
Thank you for joining us,
Thank
Reverend
you for having me.
McWilliams.
Thank you for having me.
And your subject matter, African American history.
African American studies, where African American history is included in that. Yes.
Really, that's music to my ears. So I'm going to really enjoy this interview.
Oh, thank you. I hope so. I hope I give you something and give the audience something that they could take from it.
I'm sure you will.
We were discussing with Stephen McCullough in South Carolina the fact that the Alabama prison system is overcrowded, 200% capacity. And 2 years ago, going on 3 now, the federal government told them that they had to lower their population or lose some funding, lose the federal funding. And Alabama has chosen to ignore what the federal government has said and continue to incarcerate large numbers of people. So they're still at 200% capacity. And can states not listen to the federal government and still, it doesn't feel like it's right that they could still collect federal funds and not obey the federal rules. And I know that the federal government is not supposed to always have total control over the states, but shouldn't, if they're taking money from the feds?
So I think that if the federal government had asked the states to reduce the prison population and the states refused to do so, I think the way the federal government would go about enforcing that is by withholding federal funds. So I would be interested to know if Alabama is still receiving federal funds even after the federal government had given them the mandate to reduce their prison population.
Okay, well, the Department of Justice just sent the letter. So many irregularities have been happening in the Alabama prison system. That's just one aspect. They're saying that they have states' rights. And I just want to know, states' rights supersede the federal government, or?
Not at all. Not according to the Constitution. There's the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause states that whenever there's a state law and a federal law in contradiction of one another, then the federal law will win over. So if we look and pay attention to the civil rights movement, frequently the southern states would try to invoke state rights. And one of the tactics of the civil rights movement was to continuously put the state in contradiction to the federal law, or to put the state law in contradiction to the federal law. And that was one of the major tactics that Dr. King and the civil rights movement would utilize in an effort to gain civil rights. So the answer is no. The state rights or state laws should not supersede federal law, and that's stated in the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. But very often you'll find states that try to invoke the 10th Amendment, I believe, that is called reserved powers, which states that certain states will have rights. But again, the Supremacy Clause make sure that whenever those state rights are in contradiction to federal law, whenever those state laws are in contradiction to federal law, that the federal law is supposed to win out.
Wow.
In keeping with Alabama, that issue and many other issues throughout the nation, why is it that the federal government seemingly does not, what's the word I'm looking for, force states to play nicely or treat their citizens correctly when the people in a certain state is being wronged? Why don't the federal government step in like a good parent and chastise the state and say, do right or else?
Well, we have a lot going on within our federal government where I believe, even to this day, that many are not happy with who is heading the executive branch of our federal government. The fact that we have President Barack Obama, who I believe, even though I don't always agree with everything he says, I believe he has faced unprecedented obstruction from Congress. And I believe that who he is and what he looks like and the race he's a part of has a lot to do with that. So I believe that we're in a state now where you just see that a lot of people within our national government they're not happy with who's the head of the executive branch, with our president right now. And they're not comfortable, I would say, they're not comfortable taking orders or instruction or having someone of that hue, being able to execute laws. I think that's a problem as well. And I think that what we see in the conservative movements, such as the Tea Party and the libertarian movements, there's an excessive call for state rights. This notion that the federal government is out to control everybody. So in order to protect yourself from that, you want to continue to invoke state rights. I think another factor that's involved in this as well is who makes up the prison population. Out of that 200% overpopulated prison system in Alabama, I believe statistics will show a majority of those in prison are Black and Latino men.
93%.
93% of those in prison are Black and Latino men?
Yes.
Well, I believe that also has something to do with the lack of enforcement. I believe that if you saw the same statistic for white men, there would definitely be some kind of something done to prevent that. So I believe that when you take into account who's being incarcerated and just, the fact that it's predominantly men of color, look historically at what men of color have represented and have gone through in this country, this might be another reason why you haven't seen the enforcement as strong as it should be.
I just want to step back another minute to federalism. Mm-hmm. And the advent of this recent tragic shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, which led to the Confederate flag being removed from the state grounds down there, I think it's a good opportunity to continue talking about federalism a little bit more, and state rights and the whole makeup of the Confederacy in the South. And I realize it's outdated, but the practices and the spirit of that Confederacy still lives. So would you tell us just a little bit about that Confederate flag and what it stands for in this country? Because a lot of younger people really don't understand the hoopla. Why take it down? It's just a flag. What does it symbolize?
Well, I mean, for me, I think not for me, but the Confederate flag had become a symbol of Southern pride. If we look at the history of the Confederate flag, I believe that it was not actually a flag that was carried through the Civil War, but it was something that became like a symbol of Southern pride even after the war. Now, if we look at the rise of putting Confederate flags on flagpoles, this happened in the 50s, in the 60s, and it was clearly a response to some of the civil rights. When we look at the Confederate flag, it spoke specifically to the desires and the passions of many racist whites in the South during the 50s and the 60s. Now, again, the Confederate flag was something meant to kind of represent Southern pride during the Civil War and things of that sort. And we know that the South or the Confederacy, their position was to maintain the system of enslavement, the institution of slavery in the United States. But it wasn't until the 1950s that we begin to see Southern states raise this Confederate flag and place them on top of state buildings. And it was done specifically to challenge the gains made by the civil rights movement. So, I mean, the call to eliminate, and it's a call that has been going forth for years. I remember being a little child hearing people, arguing that the Confederate flag should be taken down. And again, I think it's unfortunate that it took, the murder of 9 lives for the discussion to again raise in South Carolina before it was ultimately taken down. Other states, I believe, still have, if not the Confederate flag, they have state flags with Confederate emblems on them. We need to remove those state flags, and if I dare say so myself, maybe we also need to look at the old red, white, and blue, and if the American flag has truly had a history of speaking for all peoples. Now, when we look at the construction of this country, those people who were making and formulating the laws typically were wealthy white men. Excluded from that process were anybody of color. Women were excluded. So I think if we want to really be in a more inclusive society, perhaps our nation will show that by maybe even reevaluating what the American flag has meant for everybody who is currently in America.
That's food for thought. They're never going to change that flag, though. That's Old Glory. Oh, no, you're not going to change Old Glory. What would you, revolution.
Well, I think that, if not, we definitely need to really deal with the fact that the Constitution was not an inclusive, those who were formulating the Constitution was not an inclusive process. It was an exclusionary process. Only people who were white, male, and reached a certain status were privileged to be in that room where they sat down and constructed laws and things of that sort. And we all know that people of African descent were not defined as humans at that time.
3/5.
Right, and their intention was not to have those unalienable rights were not supposed to be bestowed upon us. As God would have it, the way it was formulated and written in the Constitution, it still gave African Americans the ability to achieve gains even underneath that quote.
But the institutional racism in this country is I had hopes that we were gonna make some headway, we were gonna make some groundway into making it less problematic, and now I don't think there's really an increase in the racism. I think that with the social media and the cameras and all the things that are going on, that it's exposed readily. It's like immediate exposure, and that's where we're still not making any headway though. If we know it's happening and we have the kickstart, I'm upset, and what are we hearing now? And I'm telling you, I'm sick of marching and carrying placards, and we need something to be done, not that.
Right. Well, I think institutional racism, it functions, is very powerful because it's racism that is ingrained in instruction. It's ingrained in the institutions. And when we talk about institutional racism, we talk about things that are being learned and being taught. If we want to challenge institutional racism, I believe we have to look at all the institutions that make up the United States of America. We have to look at the educational institution. We have to look at the economic institutions. We have to look at the religious institutions, the cultural institutions. All these things help create a network of white supremacy. If you're going to school and you're still learning that Christopher Columbus discovered America, you are invalidating the civilization and the organization of millions of indigenous people that were here before Christopher Columbus. If you're going to church and the projection of biblical figures are still Europeanized,
Say so.
even though there's biblical proof that they were in a land space where people of color dominated, then you're dealing with institutional racism. When you go as far as watching Saturday morning cartoons and and the cartoons and the superheroes and all the characters that our children grow up to like and adore are people of European descent, then you're dealing with how the network of white supremacy works, covertly teaching our children to really fantasize and wish that they were white. They basically romanticize, is what I'm saying. There's a romanticizing of whiteness. And I clearly remember myself being in second grade, asking myself in second grade, why did God have to make me born black? I remember asking myself that question when, for me, all the students were white. All my superheroes were white. And even at the time, I thought Jesus Christ himself was white.
So, preach.
Was white.
These are the things that, if you're really trying to combat institutional racism, these are the things that has to take place. Marchings and demonstrations, I do believe that they can serve a purpose as far as bringing forth awareness, but I believe the more effective way to really challenge racism is doing it on an institutional level. Let's question the curriculums. Let's question certain things being taught in the different institutions in America.
But it takes so long for change to come about. Like I worked for the state education department for 29.5 years, and I put forth information on how to make changes and what worked and what didn't work, and I had documentation and I had all the numbers for them, and it took from 1985 to 2 years ago for them to implement. So the whole generations have gone through the miseducation, and what they've done with the new education system is not exactly what we presented to the state education department. They changed it so that it's more challenging for the student, but they're only learning how to take a test. They're not learning application of anything except how to take the test. And I'm having a lot of problems with that whole not preparing our younger people for real life.
Right. I think that there was a book, I wish I knew the scholar who wrote it, but there was a book that I read a while ago. It was an edited book. It was called Schooling versus Education. And our children are being schooled, but schooled in a sense they're being trained, but they're not really being educated. Trained, to already participate in the society that as it exists. Whereas education is about transforming society, making things for the better. And I dare say that our educational institutions are not really educational institutions. They're more schooling institutions. I know for me, I didn't really believe I was being educated until I got to college, and more specifically, maybe even grad school. And that's me specifically, but I'm sure you'll find other people with similar stories. Is if you define educating as a transformative process. I didn't believe that I could make any transformation or participate in any, make a transformative contribution to society until I got into college. And I believe that if we teach our students that they can make a transformative contribution to society as early as kindergarten, we would see some of the changes that we find ourselves still fighting for, especially if you bestow that upon the youth, because the youth, they don't get caught up in looking at odds and what are the odds and looking at statistics and things of that sort. When you're young, when I was young, I was going to the NBA. I didn't care what the odds were. I didn't care what the statistics were. That was my mindset. I was going to be a basketball player, and
that was
the heck with the odds. So I think that if we begin to educate our children to let them know that they can contribute positively to society at an extremely early age, we will begin to see a transformation in society, because the youth, they don't really sit back and try to wonder about odds and what are the chances of this happening. They usually go full throttle and try to make the change that they believe they can make.
Thanks.
I have a question for you, Reverend McWilliams.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that it wasn't until your college years that you realized your transformative ability.
Yes, sir.
What do you think would have happened had, for whatever reason, had you not gone on to college? What would have become of you?
Well, I would have probably bought into the system as far as the only way to be successful in this system, for me, I thought, was to either be famous or to be rich. And you try to achieve those things by any means. So when I went into college, I went in still with the thoughts that I was going to play professional basketball somewhere, but I went in and majored in communications because I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. But I also believed if I could get my face on TV in any way, that's the only contribution I could make to society. Money was, I thought that you had to have money to be important, viewed important, or to do anything important. And I thought that capitalism was the only viable economic system out there. And I didn't start learning, I had to alter my way of thinking. But for me, I didn't begin to alter my way of thinking until I started learning about my cultural heroes. And I think that that's very important. Every culture have specific cultural heroes. Europeans have their cultural heroes. Africans have their cultural heroes. Latinos have their cultural heroes. Asians have theirs. And I think in our educational system, we shouldn't try to make everyone look at one group of people and make those people their heroes. For example, growing up, we're all taught, when we look at cowboys versus Indians, I know I was taught to root for the cowboy. We have Westerns. But if we knew our history, we would understand that our history is probably closer linked to the indigenous people. So if I would have had a knowledge of that, I'm sure I would have been one of those guys rooting for the Native Americans, rooting for the indigenous in those Westerns. But it wasn't until I started learning about my cultural heroes that I began to realize that I come from a lineage of geniuses and wonderful minds who have really taken the time to investigate what's going on in this world and bring forth some universal truths.
I was asked that question because I agree with you. And I think at some point, those who are fortunate enough to continue on with their educational process, whether it be in a formal setting like a school or a college, or even through your own research and studies, I think that we do realize our potential and that transformative button kicks in. But my concern is about the many who never get beyond high school if they finish high school.
Right.
And it's like a life that's aborted in a sense, because they do take on any means necessary attitude to obtain what they believe that this capitalistic society deem as successful and important.
Right.
So a lot of our people fall into those traps and then thusly become fodder for the prison industrial complex and everything else ill that the society has to offer. That's why I was probing. Thank you for your answer.
No problem. Thank you for the question. But I will say that once that happens, the system is being promoted to everyone, and it gives everyone this thought, and all races, all people think that they're going to make it big and make it successful without actually studying the system and realizing that the system is constructed so that only a few will be able to be empowered. And I say that to say that, in the Black community, many of our families, if it's not our families, then we know of families who are struggling, who are trying to make ends meet. A lot of times we're put in positions where we feel like we have to either go all the way or continue to suffer. And when I say go all the way, we'll go to any extreme to achieve some kind of financial success, or no matter how temporary that might be. And oftentimes we're put in that choice of, do we want to go to whatever extreme to achieve some financial success, or do we want to remain in the conditions that we're in? And many people are making that decision to let's go for it by whatever means. And then we get caught up in a system that will now imprison us. And now we're back to doing what the system had been created for us to do anyway, which is just free labor. We have always been brought here to do the work, but never to reap the benefits. So
voting for us has not been really helpful.
Well, here's what it is.
We don't vote.
Yeah, not only that, and I will say that, let me say this. The reason why we don't vote, I believe, is complex. I believe part of the reason why some of us don't vote is because we don't believe in the system. Some people have been turned off and just don't believe it'll ever work for us. Another part might be just for sheer laziness or ignorance. But I will say this, though. It's rare that you'll get a Black politician in there that will continue to stand up for Black people once they get in office. So I often wonder, what role does the fact that the Black politician has now transformed himself, that might play a role. Oftentimes I feel like politicians are too concerned with staying in office and not willing to do the things that will create effective change for the people.
Exactly.
I also blame the black politician for some of the reason why we may not come out to vote, because it's
Say
hard
some
to
of
find
them.
a black politician that is just going to be so committed to the people that he's not or she is not worried about what repercussions may come from the political side. So I think that the voting question is a lot of entanglements within that whole voting issue that all need to be investigated.
We're chuckling because in a pre-interview conversation, we were talking about some of this, some politicians. Now, I believe, perhaps I'm not naive, but I believe that most people enter into the political arena with high hopes, good faith, looking to represent the people. However, once they're inside what I call the belly of the beast,
Right.
that the conditions are so horrible that the lay people cannot fathom, that these politicians, black, white, or otherwise, you have but a couple of choices. One being conform, and the other be suffer the consequences. I think most people conform, so that's where all of the pre-election promises seems to go
By the wayside.
in the way of the dinosaurs.
Right.
So I can't imagine, and I don't want to find out by going through the process, but I think once they're inside this political machine, that I don't know that the public has any clue as what really goes on inside that monster.
They don't even have a
And
clue.
I think that, that ties back to the institutional and the structural racism we see in this country. It doesn't benefit most black politicians, and they'll say it's because of sheer numbers. But when you talk about issues that are, or concerns that have existed in the black community for years, issues like mass incarceration, issues like police brutality, issues like education, all these things black community have been saying for years, and we can't really get politicians to speak on that until it affects the white community in certain ways. But like I said, when we look at the structural racism that exists in America, the structures, the way the political system is set up, this is why black politicians are hesitant to stand up for issues that affect specifically the black community. This is why the black police officer will oftentimes perpetrate more hell on the black citizen he stopped or she stopped than the white police officer will. My worst experience with the police officer was with a black New Jersey state trooper. And oftentimes I believe it's that once you get into these systems, you oftentimes have to prove that you're not just looking out for one group of people. And oftentimes that means, or what that translates into, is not even paying them any attention.
I think that's the hallmark of institutional racism and what that means. When there's truly institutional racism, it doesn't matter the color of the person. I could be a black man, you're a black man, but if I'm acting under institutional racism, then I can be a racist.
That's right.
Now, would you like to share some details about that experience in New Jersey?
Oh, well, I don't mind telling you. I just want to go back to the statement you made. I am one who doesn't believe. Now, I believe black people can perpetuate white supremacy. I'm not sure if black people can be racist at this point, in the sense that if black people can organize in such a way to structurally stop white people from gaining anything. I don't think had that power. But they can perpetuate white supremacy in the sense that they get these messages and sometimes they internalize the same things that have been perpetuated. Therefore, we will express that in a lot of self-hating ways. My experience in New Jersey, I got stopped for speeding. This was some time ago. I got stopped from speeding. I pulled over. The particular officer, not knowing all my rights, he went into my car. I had laundry in the car. He moved the laundry, shuffled things in my car. He was just very rude and nasty, and in finding nothing, he ended up putting the stuff that was in my car, he kind of just threw it back any old kind of way where I could not see out my rear view mirror. I mean, the rear view, I couldn't see out the rear window. So I step out to adjust it. He basically tells me, I need to pull up. I need to go to another exit before I want to fix it, not to fix it in front of him. It was just rude and nasty. It wasn't an experience where I was put in handcuffs or anything. But as far as the experience of politeness, he was very rude. And I didn't know what his problem was. I had another incident where when I was living in Philadelphia, I was stopped and for no reason, but the reason he gave me was that I didn't stop at a stoplight. So when he asked for my ID, and I was with a group of people, and they know I stopped at the stop sign, but I think that it was the time of night. I didn't drive a fancy car, but, just a group of black people in a car. I'm sure it evoked some kind of concern, but this was a black officer, and he asked for my ID. I gave him my New York ID. I was a grad student at Temple at this time. My New York ID did not say my full name, so what I did give him was also my Temple faculty ID, because I was also teaching courses there. And upon seeing my Temple faculty ID, that's when he began to shy back. He asked me did I give him that Temple ID because I could have him removed from the force. He just,
Wow.
I did not know where that came from, but he basically told me to go on with the warrant. So, but I don't know what the result of that would have been had I not given him my Temple faculty ID. I wasn't dressed with a suit or a tie at that time, but I'm sure he didn't think I was faculty. This was, I was probably like 27 at the time.
Well, thank you. I just want to reiterate, it's important enough to make sure that we're all saying the same thing about this racism. And I agree with you, black people cannot be racist. Let's be clear about that. However, when it comes to institutional racism,
right,
we can carry out those policies. And in fact,
indeed,
in that aspect, we cannot be racist. And I'm tired of people, black, white, otherwise, saying blacks are racist too. We cannot. Would you give us your definition of what it means to be a racist?
I think racism is a system that prevents another group of people based on race from progressing in various ways and obtaining the basic needs. So it's when one group of people stop another group of people based on race from achieving and acquiring their basic needs. And basic needs, I tend to believe, are food, shelter, and clothing, employment, things of that sort. So when you have a system in place that can basically prevent black people, Asian people, people based on what their race are, what their race is, when there's a system out there that can prevent a group of people from acquiring those basic needs as a people, as a collective group of people, just solely based on their race, that for me is a system of racism. And it functions in America off of white supremacy, where whiteness means good per se, and blackness is the extreme opposite, which means bad. So there is a type of reverence, a praise, a worship of whiteness, whereas whiteness is always met with positive expectation and blackness is met with a negative connotation.
Okay, so to our viewers, what Bones is saying, what the professor here said, and what Hilda always says, if you're black, you cannot be a racist because we lack the power to oppress.
That's right.
And I can't be any more blunt, so don't buy into it. Don't let others tell you that you are. You can't be. It is impossible. Not now. Now, maybe in the future that'll change, but right now we cannot be.
And I think we also need to examine the fact that the concept of race is a European construct. This is not something that black people created. Black people, we come from the African continent where everybody had the same pigmentation per se. And where there might have been differences, with the way we distinguish one another was from cultural differences. Right. And it wasn't race like that. It wasn't racial differences. It was cultural differences. So if you look at the history of black people, even when we have reigned and have had power, we've never used our power to dominate someone based on a race. Not on a race. Might have been other factors where there might have been, but not on race. Matter of fact, because we never thought that way, that's the only way Europeans were allowed to get inside the continent anyway. Because had there been a racist construct in the mind of African people, I'm telling you, Europeans would have never been able to penetrate the African continent. But we allowed them to come in because the thought was, even though these are some different looking people, they kind of pale here. We don't know who they are. We do respect the fact that they're people and their humanity. And just the worldview was different, that Africans did not look at, in particular, they didn't look at land as they own that. You know,
Right.
Land came from God. Everybody who was here had, as long as they treated the land in a respectable manner, you had a right to it. So Africans were traditionally what I call xenophilic. We had and not xenophobic. Whereas in Europeans, whenever they came into a contact with people who looked and acted different than them, then they would use means to try to dominate and, if not, terminate them. Whereas Africans, when they saw people who looked different than them, they recognized there was a basic humanity to them, and they still allowed them to come in. Same thing with the indigenous people in America. The indigenous people allowed Europeans to come in and experience the land. They showed them how to navigate. They showed them how to grow crops on the land. But we see that because of the xenophobic attitude of Europeans, they returned that favor that the indigenous people granted them for. They returned that favor by committing genocide on the indigenous people.
Wow.
Good sigh.
Well, thank you.
Where do you go from there?
I'll tell you where. I want to go one other place.
Sure.
Listen closely as you spoke. So we've said that black people, you can't be racist because you lack the power to oppress. And you mentioned about race and it being a social construct and all. And when it comes to the enslavement of our people in this country, many folks say, well, that we were not the only people that were ever enslaved, which is true. And they'll say, furthermore, back in Africa, blacks enslaved blacks, which is true. But I think the horror of this New World slavery was it was the first time that it was ever solely based on that social construct of race. Mm-hmm. So just by being born in black skin,
and it was perpetual.
Perpetual, you were a slave. And I think it also carries on into our modern time in what they call New World slavery, where it's just by being born into a certain skin, into a certain group of people, that you're ripe for the picking and become food for this system of incarceration, this whatever it's called, prison and industrial
complex.
Yep.
So I just, if you would, just a little bit so we can give people something to take away that they can process.
Right. Well, again, like the American and the West, I'll say, they definitely, what they did with their enslavement, if we look at the way enslavement worked on the African continent per se, usually those who were enslaved, and even when we look at Africans who sold other Africans to Europeans, those Africans sold to Europeans were people that those particular Africans felt could not contribute to their particular community. And it wasn't based on race. Oftentimes it was prisoners in war when there were different battles between different communities on the African continent. You know, oftentimes you would have prisoners of war, and a lot of times, for instance, the African ruler would say, you know, we have these prisoners of war and we have these Europeans willing to trade weapons with us. We will give them these prisoners of war because these people who are prisoners of war are not productive citizens in our community. They're prisoners of war. We got them as in trade, or we got them as for winning a particular war. We're going to give these Europeans these individuals and we'll take the weapons. I say that to say that even in Africans selling Africans to Europeans, because we didn't identify by I'm selling a black man to a white man, that's not how they framed it. In their mind, they're looking at this person is not even of my culture. This person is not even of my community. And there's a cultural distinction there. So this person will not benefit the culture I'm a part of. So this is who I'm going to give to this European man here. So it wasn't a system of I'm selling my black brother to this white man. That's not the thought process that existed. But again, as you said, when we look at how slavery functioned here in the United States, chattel slavery is what functioned here, where we removed the humanity from the individual and made that person purely property. We treated them like we treat pets.
Worse.
Or worse. Yes,
Worse.
I ask my students often, when you buy a puppy and a cat, how many of you sat there and thought about the trauma that cat or the dog, the parent had when they separated the puppy from the parent? Most of us don't think like that. And I'm not comparing us to animals, but I'm saying the system that existed was a system where for white Americans, black people were not human. They were just merely property. And therefore, you don't attach any humanity to those people. You don't attach emotions. You don't attach pain. You don't attach feelings. You don't make any of that attach. You detach that from the individual. And that's what made chattel slavery so bad here, is that they removed our humanity. They expected us to work like humans, but yet they expected us to work like superhumans, but yet refused to treat us like basic humans. And they would promote that we were not humans. And that's something that we have to question the psychology of the white man, because even in their promotion of us as non-humans, we still had to deal with rape by the white man. We had to deal with sexual exploitation, all that stuff. But yet these are things that white people are doing with people that they're saying are not even human. That's a whole nother issue, but that's something wrong in the mentality there. But again, now we're living in a day now where people who are born black are saying, it's almost by race again. We can figure out if you go to a good school or not. Governor Cuomo said nobody should be able to tell what type of education you receive based on your zip code. Well, I'm afraid we're living in a time period now where, especially in New York, we still have segregation. Segregation has always existed in the North, just like in the South, except it was just more covered up in the North. But now, what we see now is that the North and the South have now promote segregation in the same way. It's done in a way that they hope can be hidden, but many people are waking up now. Many people are recognizing that institutional racism has been the way America has functioned since its inception, and many people are committed to destroying it. And I think that as people continue to move on that front, we begin to see some changes. And if you look at history, me being a professor of history, whenever we look at political change and structural change in any country or in any landmass, that usually involves uprising, and it's not always a peaceful or one of those events that you sit back and just watch in admiration. It usually involves certain levels of violence and certain level of confrontation. But we also must identify what's happening to black people as violence. Whenever we see that black children are not being educated should be, we have to begin to interpret that as violence being perpetuated against our children. When we see that our black men and Latino men are filling up these prisons, we have to look at that as violence perpetuated by the state against men. So this whole process is a violent process, whether we're talking about structural racism is violent, and the way to eradicate structural racism will be violent.
We have to really get busy. And we need more professors like you. We need more input on our part. And a lot of our people are afraid, to put forth any kind of effort, because I ran for mayor and I was beaten down by my own people. I ran for mayor of New York, and I was hoping that our community would, because I'm part of the community. I'm a native New Yorker. I didn't come from out of New York and say, let me come in and help your city. I said I lived here all my life, and I know what needs to be done, and I'm ready to step up. But our quote unquote leaders said, well, no, we'll think of something else for you, not right now.
Well, you probably ran into those who have been bought by or bought into. We have there's a difference between established leaders and
I didn't pick them.
Say that again?
I said I didn't pick them.
No, I know. We don't, real true leaders are picked by the community. Established leaders are given to the community because of other favors and things.
Can you say that again?
I said real leaders are promoted and picked by the community. Established leaders are given to the community. Somebody plants them there and say, here's your leader here, let's follow him. But the community basically validates who the leader is. And when I said before about violent process, I don't necessarily mean going out and shoot. I'm saying the way the system perpetuates itself, the way we see the fact that Schools are still segregated. Neighborhoods are still segregated. Blacks are still being incarcerated. We must interpret this as violence. This is the system perpetuating violence on our people. And when you understand that the system is perpetuating violence on our people, then you have to understand that our solution must be just as violent. So we must find a way to negate that. We have to be violent against that system. Now, if being violent against that system every now and again calls for a demonstration here and a march there, I'm okay for that. But we must be violent against that system, meaning whenever they perpetuate a curriculum that is not for us, we must be that more vigilant to perpetuate a curriculum that is for us. That's the violence I'm talking about. That this turmoil, this combatants, this is what needs to be, and this is what needs to happen in order to bring down structural racism.
Is segregation such a bad thing?
Depends. It's not a bad thing when it can be used very effectively when you want to consolidate resources, when you want to work together for a collective good. It can be a bad thing when resources are not shared and when one group has found a way to actively obtain all resources and they want to keep it for themselves. I do believe that, segregation, or what I would call strategic separation,
All right.
can be, I believe strategic separation can be a positive in some aspects of our community. But when I say segregating, we've never been, as a people, we've never been a segregating people. Even when you look at our churches may be segregated, but they have never been segregating. We have never actively stopped white people from coming into our churches. We've never actively stopped people from coming into our communities. But we have said that if you're going to come into these communities, there must be a certain value system you must adhere to. I think that is a strategic way to go about separation, so that, people who live in a community have a value system that is similar. I do think that strategic separation has a place. And maybe another time, another show, we can go there. But I think that, especially when you're dealing with, I think a good example is Chinatown. That is a group of people who have strategically separated, but they've done so that they can work collaboratively amongst themselves to ensure that they all have the necessary resources to benefit that community, and that they don't find themselves competing amongst themselves for resources here or there.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent answer. I'm just going to try to tie all of this in for a second.
Yes, sir.
In the fields of, or better yet, the disciplines of social science, for that matter, some aspect of political science, America is often referred to as the American experiment. This place that we call home, whatever it is, whether it be heaven for some or hell for others, it's my home. I like it here. This is all I know.
Right.
But it's oftentimes called an experiment. What will it take for the people, hopefully those in power, to realize that it's an experiment gone awry? And as a scientist, when you're at your laboratory and doing what you do, if the experiment does not work, then you simply try to figure out what went wrong and start again. So what do you think it will take for the people in power, the powers that be, to realize that the American experiment is not working for the American people?
Well, I think you have to change who you have in power, because the people who we have in power are the ones who the American experiment has worked for.
It's working for them.
Yeah, it's working for them. When I think it was less than 1% of those in Congress had their children in war, but yet they're the ones who vote whether or not we go to war. I think that somehow, some way, some of these issues that are going on in America has to hit the homes of these politicians. Because if you ask them, the experiment is going well, and they're separated from the problems that happen to the common folk. So I think that in order for those in power to recognize that the experiment has gone bad, it will take the organization of the masses of people And the masses of people have not yet. There's still quite a few of those within those masses who believe that they can one day be a part of that elite group. And when the masses of people really sit down and study the way the system functions, and when they come to the realization that the way this system functions, it was never meant for the masses of people to enjoy the fruits of it, then when the masses begin to organize, I saw a depiction that if all the pawns on your chessboard decided to work together, they can figure out a way to get to that queen. You know what I mean? So if the pawns,
checkmate.
Yeah, if the pawns in the system or those are the masses, rank and file, who are in the masses, come together and begin to think of a way that they can collectively make change for the benefit of all. See, we live in a nation that promotes individualism, that glorifies individualistic notions. And what that does is, by promoting individualism, you're hoping that the individual removes him or herself from the collective. So don't be concerned about your brother or your sister, but let's figure out a way how you can be successful. Well, we need to begin to reverse that. My success, I can never be successful if my brother and my sister are not successful. So I have to begin to look for a formula that will prove that I can be successful alongside my brother and my sister. So when we begin to have that type of thought process, then we will be able to take the message to those in power and begin to demand that they begin to move in a way that is beneficial for all. And if they don't do it, then we're organized in such a way that we can remove them from office anyway, and we'll be able to supplant them anyway and begin to make laws that are more collaborative and less individualistic. But that's why I say again, when we look at the process of how this nation was formed, it was a group of exclusive elite people who made all these decisions. They weren't concerned about, our nation is not concerned about the cooperation of the masses. It promotes individualism. And that's a tenet that is often promoted in the American dream. Individualism is a tenet of that. And we have to really begin to challenge and examine if individualism is indeed beneficial. How can individualism be beneficial for the masses of people?
Willie Lynch won't let that happen anyway with us.
Yeah, we have to get through that. Willie Lynch bothers us too, but I think even as a collective, well, see, even white people have to begin to understand that this system ain't made for the majority of you either.
But they don't know that.
No, they don't know. That's because of white privilege. White privilege allows them to bypass that and says, well, hopefully somewhere my whiteness will be a benefit for me. Or when they don't, what also enables them to, or what it blinds them to the fact that this system is not for them, is they're able to say, well, at least I'm not black. You know what I mean?
That's it.
So the fact that they can say these things, for them, it still proves some level of hope that they can one day achieve the American dream or this elite status. But the elite status was never meant for the masses of people. Otherwise, we couldn't call it elite. Elite is a separatist notion in itself. To be elite is to distinguish oneself from the masses or from a group of people. So if you want to be elite, you can never really be for the masses of people, or you can never be amongst the masses of people. So we have to question that.
Wow.
Excellent answer again. And if I'm hearing you correctly, in terms of this American experiment, any changes to benefit the people will have to come from the people.
That's it. We can't look for elites to make changes for the masses, because they have been taught to do things and act in such a way that will keep them elite. They're never going to do anything that's going to relinquish their power. That statement, I can't think of the time, but power never easily gives up itself. It has to be taken.
Power concedes nothing without.
There you go.
That's Frederick Douglass.
I know what you're talking. Yeah.
Frederick Douglass. Yeah.
Those in power are never going to create a system of structure that will allow them to relinquish that power. So we have to, again, the only way that the people will benefit is when the people start moving in that way.
The professor here is a very scholastic way of saying power to the people.
Very scholastic. And you know what? That's what our call has been since we got here. And even when you look at our organizations, there was a point in time during the Black Power movement where we felt like we had to begin to do for ourselves, so we couldn't let white folks in. But even when we look at our movement here, we've always been power for the people. You had to have it had to be about your attitude and your value system. If you wanted to be part of the Black Panther Party, or if you wanted to work with the Black Panther Party, you had to have a similar value system. Even if your race didn't match, they judged you based on your value system. So you had the brown berets, you had the white left, or the white socialists that worked. So it was a value system. That's what we really have to begin to change. And I think that once we begin to adjust our value system, we will see just how corrupt some of these other structural institutions have been in America.
Now, I just have one other question for you quickly. And I've enjoyed this interview. I've hung on to every word. I've been cheesing the whole time. And I really, because I told you when we started, this is my language. I like this. Now, I enjoy your passion. I know that this is not just a career for you. You believe this stuff. This is part of you. It comes across when you speak.
Thank you.
And I really enjoy that. And as a transformative being, what mark would you like to leave on this world? What is it that Reverend McWilliams, the professor, what is it that what's your mark that you're trying to leave?
That's a great question. You know what? I won't say a long time ago, a few years ago, I stopped being worried about that question. I think as far as what everybody else will think of me, I think I have 5 beautiful children that when I pass away, I want them to be able to say he was a good dad. I want him to be able to, want my children to be able to say everything he did was because he was concerned about the world that we would grow up in. And a lot of my motivation and a lot of the things that I do and a lot of the values that I believe in and like to promote basically are done because I think those are the best values. That's the type of world I want my children to grow up in. I hope I do leave a mark. Hope I do influence some people beyond my children, but I don't get caught up. I don't know if I will. But for me, when my time is up, if all my children can say, wow, he was an awesome dad who worked in a way that he thought would make the world better for us. And that's really all that matters to me. And
running out of time, I know. So I want to thank you again for choosing In My Shoes, and thank my co-host, Joe Smith, for again dealing with the craziness that's New York.
In my shoes, too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda.
We'll see you in My Shoes too next month. Be well. Take it easy.
Yeah, M-Wham got a message for you. Check it out. How many of us offended by the boxers or the sagging pants in our community? I got a song for you. Check it out. Here we go. Come on.
Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up.
Yeah.
It's the new style.
Come on, collect, talk to me.
Say, Mr. Harris, sagging jeans is an epidemic.
That's right.
One that I've never been a fan of. And I can't stand how these young men, they sagging, they dragging. Come on, pull your pants up. And I know us girls, we in the wrong for not putting these fellas on.
You got the power.
But I'm offended by boxers. And I think that we all should be.
Come on, help me.
Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up.
Why?
It's the new style.
Come on.
Pull your pants up, pull your pants up.
Yeah.
Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. It'll make your mama proud.
Here we go.
We living in a world affected by an epidemic. Sagging jeans and sweatpants is how I'm living. Need to set the example to make the future right. So hear our message when we hit you with the chair, right?
Pull your pants up, pull your pants up. Pull your pants up.
It's kind of catchy.
Pull your pants up, pull your pants
Come on,
up.
with it.
It's the new style. Pull your pants up, pull your pants up.
heard your belt say.